So with that, I call this debate to order. All right. And I'm looking for a speech in the affirmative. And Dwayne Wyndham has already stepped up to make a speech. So, Dwayne, are you ready? You have 4 minutes.
All right. Madam Chair, what kind of relationship do we have if we can't talk about our values openly? If we must mask our emotions, bite our tongues, and stick to small talk with each other, are we family or just awkward acquaintances that happen to share some patterns in our DNA? Are we a family where everyone can be our authentic selves, be vulnerable, share our experiences of joy and sorrow, be truthful even when it is painful, and when needed, call each other back to be our best selves? Or are we a family that ignores the elephant in the room, sweeps things under the rug, and allows individuals to dominate the conversation, spouting one ugly thing after the next? Family must be more than just people who happen to be genetically related and get together at the holidays. I get it, though. You're afraid of the rift, terrified of having to choose sides, of people giving ultimatums and threatening to never return because, of course, you don't want to upset mom. But at what cost? Uncle Tom, you say horrible things about groups of people, presuming they aren't in the room. Or maybe you just don't care if they are. Why does anyone in this family have to suffer in silence? Mom's not going to spontaneously combust. She's not going to keel over from a heart attack because someone finally told the whole unvarnished truth for once. We have family that got married, that got engaged and had a beautiful wedding, and this family has been silent as the grave. Why? Because it was Jeff getting married to Gary, who he's loved for years. A life milestone, a punctuation mark, exclamation point of life that has been lost in this family. We have left family behind and made it clear they are less than. Why? So mom doesn't get upset at finding out her grandson's a gay man? It is easy to say just keep the peace when your life, your values, your loved ones are not being left behind, treated as less than, or put in jeopardy. At some point, silence is acceptance. And allowing Uncle Tom to make flagrantly false, paranoid, delusional, factually disproven assertions as though they are facts everyone knows makes me and everyone else in this family complicit in their toxic spread. I will be complicit no longer. I will no longer tolerate ignorant, wild assertions being made without evidence. If you think 2,000 Mules or Natural News is anything resembling evidence, I'm going to call you out. I'm going to shame and humiliate you for being a fool. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If you're going to make a bold assertion, you better bring the receipts, citations, and make absolutely certain your evidence is actually what you claim it is. This family, we are better than a wall of silence and whistling past the graveyard. We are more than what we have become. Our bonds must be more than paper-thin masks and half-bitten tongues. If our family connections are so frayed and weak they cannot stand us being authentic, then we desperately need to reconnect and fix that problem. Turn off the TV, shut off the social media, stop the podcast, stop stirring ourselves up before family gatherings with the strident voices outside that profit from tearing us apart. They don't care at all about this family. Get curious, talk one on one. Go deep. Let's talk about what's really going on with us. If we are family worth having, then we must have faith that our bond will hold, even when tested by intense and strident disagreement. This holiday season, let us be family worth having. Madam Chair.
All right. Hands for our speaker. This is a way that you can show thanks for getting up there and speaking. And during the speech, you can also say, "Whoa, I like what you're saying." So that's a great way to do that. So, all right, I'm going to receive one or two questions for the speaker. If anyone has a question, you can raise your electronic hand, and usually that's down at the bottom of your screen under, for mine, it's more, and then there's raise hand there. So I will give a moment for you to think. Maybe you have a question that you're curious about. All right. Ethan, you can ask your question to me, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I raised my hand mainly because I didn't see anyone else doing it, but I'm just curious if the speaker could talk a little more about what sounds like a specific experience that's happened in their family in terms of what the dynamics were of that, what, if others disagreed, if you received pushback, what actually happened, obviously share what you want, what the speaker can share what they want and don't want, but I'd be curious to hear more. Thank you.
Thanks. About 1 minute to answer.
My spouse's family is extraordinarily conservative Catholic, and one of the family members, yes, did recently get married, and no one in the family would talk about it or acknowledge it. And for some reason, they don't show up at the holidays for us. And so it's been extraordinarily painful being the outsider. And so trying to avoid being the rabble rouser every time I show up. But yes, they'll say horrible things about people on the left, people who live in Austin, people, the Sodom on the Colorado is one of the terms that was used. And so, that it's extraordinarily difficult, and knowing I have been explicitly asked by my spouse not to say anything more than once. And so it's just been extraordinarily challenging trying to keep my mouth shut. And I kind of hit my breaking point after after the last visit. And so this is where I'm at.
Yeah, I will take one more question. Amy Totenberg, you can unmute and ask your question to me, Madam Chair.
Hi, Madam Chair. I'd like to ask the speaker when they think is a recommended time to resolve these issues. Will we do it during the dinner? Is this something you want to call and talk about a week before Thanksgiving? Is there maybe a plan or a best practice to resolve a deep-seated family issue?
The one suggestion I would have is if you look up Living Room Conversations, a somewhat familiar organization to this one, similar goals to have people talk about it. They have a guide specifically for talking about around the holidays on that, and that can be specifically helpful. And in that, yes, one of the encouragements is to reach out ahead of time, to ask people specifically to, yes, minimize their political media consumption ahead of time so that we can be entering in a more receptive mindset and along these other things. And so, yes, I pulled in some of that in when I was working on this.
All right. And with that, the speaker is thanked. Hands for our speaker. For speech in the negative, I'm going to take privilege of the chair because I feel strongly about this and I'm going to speak. So I'm handing the gavel to Natalie. Natalie is now Miss Chair. Natalie, will you take the chair, please? And could I speak?
Yes.
All right. I rise to speak against this resolution. Please do not call me out, Miss Chair. You're sweet, you are smart, you're great, I love you, but do not call me out. Family is where I just need to relax. So I get it all week long at school. It's from the left, it's diversity, it's inclusion, it's equity, it's you have white privilege and you don't have a voice. It's exhausting. And believe me, I'm working at it. But I get home and I just need for people to be good to me. And then I go to church and I get it from the right. Why aren't we participating in the Walk for Life? Why didn't you put out the Christian Voters Guide? Why don't you do this? And I get home, I'm telling you, I just need my family to love me and not tell me that I'm not doing it well enough. Okay, so just know that I'm already working on it. I'm not stupid, and it's not that I don't care. But my mom, rest her soul, she taught us that home is where people are nice to you. And so I am speaking against this resolution, and I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you to the speaker. I'll now take a couple of questions. All right, we're going to go with a question from Leah.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. I think my question for the lady is really about what niceness consists of. If the speaker saw a friend of hers, poised by the edge of a cliff, she would reach out and grab them, even if the yank kind of startled them or hurt them a little. What should family members do when we see someone poised to do a lot of harm to themselves or others because of their belief, if we love them?
I think we should just make some hot chocolate and turn on Charlie Brown.
All right, and we'll go with another question from April Joy Steele.
Hi, I'm just wondering when I listen to you, I'm wondering when you talk about that home is the sanctuary, what ingredients specifically would you see as being a sanctuary? For me, it would be grace, humility, and silent acceptance.
I love that. I will accept your answer there. And I'll explain a little bit more when I take the chair back. Thanks so much for the question.
All right, we'll take one more question from Kathy Goodman.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to ask the speaker, what would she do if at the dinner where like the uncle who is rude starts making, everybody's agreed to be nice or whatever, and I kind of feel this way also, but then you've got this one person there who's making either misogynistic or racist or anti-Semitic comments. Do you think it's okay to ignore that person for the sake of keeping the calm?
No, I don't think it should be ignored. And I'll say more about that as we get into the debate.
Okay.
Thank you to the speakers and the questioners. Hands for the speaker and the questioners. And I will give Madam Chair her gavel back.
Thank you, Ms. Natalie. So my point there is simply that I really want to elicit the conversation that you were just starting to have in those questions. And we're going to learn a lot in this debate. So be thinking about what is really important to you and then how we're going to manage it. We're learning a lot here. I'm going to call on Alex Weisenfels for a speech in the affirmative.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, you have 4 minutes.
Excellent, I'll start my timer so I know. There we go. So, the work of maintaining democracy is what we do before anyone votes on anything. It's talking with each other, learning to understand what's at stake for others, even if they don't share our priorities, and then figuring out together what might work for everyone. Our families are often the best place to practice understanding people because generally speaking, we should be talking with them and trying to understand them anyway. I'm not saying that you should be trying to spend time with toxic people, but I am saying that often a person we think is toxic is actually just afraid of something we aren't yet aware of. And to make this understanding process easier, I use a 3-step reconciliation method. First, understanding one's own values. Second, understanding others' values. And third, framing the situation constructively. Understanding one's own values is important because you can't have a meaningful disagreement without a clear picture of what you actually care about. It's easy to get distracted by arguments over minor points. For example, if you're concerned about climate change, your main value is you don't want the environment to be destroyed. You want to avoid the risk of disaster in the form of negligent treatment of the environment. Everything else is details. You can argue about scientific studies and mathematical models, but all of that only has meaning in the context of preventing disaster. Other people will probably agree with this, even if they may disagree with how you interpret the evidence and what predictions you make. Next comes understanding other people's values, which you should do before talking about your own. Your relative might be concerned about the economy and they want to avoid paying high costs if they can avoid it. They fear austerity, what they consider to be an unnecessary restriction of prosperity through rules that create scarcity. That's a valid concern, and it's important to tell them that before explaining your own concerns. And these first 2 steps don't involve arguing about facts or methods at all. They're simply about learning what the both of you value and fear when it comes to society and policy. Almost nobody values harm for its own sake. Instead, people disagree about the trade-offs they're willing to make regarding costs and risks. And next comes framing the situation constructively. And I won't go into much detail on this part because it gets into more complicated concepts, and it's not necessary for establishing the mutual respect and understanding. The first two steps handle that. However, I will say that framing the situation constructively requires creativity and effective negotiation, because if we disagree on what trade-offs we're willing to make, we can often work together so we don't have to make those trade-offs. I am fairly certain that there are ways of keeping the economy healthy while transitioning to alternative energy sources. But we don't need to solve all those problems right away. Let's say I don't think that dinosaur attacks are likely, but if I value that people don't get attacked by dinosaurs, and I value helping people stay safe in general, that's all the agreement that we need. And I'm happy to help people with identifying values and framing situations constructively. I hope that the reconciliation method helps you discover that people are more reasonable than you think. And thank you.
Thank you. Is there a question for the speaker? Ed Ames. Ed, you can unmute and ask your question to the chair.
Yeah. Creating space for rational dialogue is well and good. You also can have people in groups who are pushed literally to the point of Schadenfreude, where they're literally taking pleasure in destroying the things of those people that they dislike, that becomes for them a positive value. So I admire the approach you describe.
Okay, what's your question?
And I think it has limits when you're dealing with emotional arguments.
Okay, Alex, would you like to respond?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So it seems the point is that some people do develop a value of harm for its own sake or spite. My approach is generally to focus back on what those people started out caring about, because they probably didn't start out wanting other people to suffer. Their values, they felt ignored for so long that they want other people to feel the consequences of what they perceive as ignoring them. And so the validation, learning about them and listening to what they actually care about and getting them in that comfortable space where they feel heard, that goes a long way towards dispelling that spite, at least for the duration of the conversation. And that can wear away at the spite over time. I hope that helps.
All right, and Joseph, you have a question for the speaker. You can unmute and ask your question to the chair.
Yes, Madam Speaker, my question is a matter of timing. Does this calling out happen at appetizer, in the middle of the meal, at dessert? I think timing is really important. So my question, what is the ideal timing? And the other question is, you know what? Let me stop there.
All right, Alex, you have about a minute to answer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As far as timing goes, this is a good question. The beginning of the conversation would usually be when somebody is talking about their values. It could be planned or not, it doesn't matter. If somebody starts talking about their values and they're doing it very aggressively in a hostile fashion, I find that it helps to actively listen and get curious about what they feel, and that makes them more comfortable, and then they start just talking about what they care about in a way that's less hostile. And then after they feel heard, then I can introduce that maybe some other people feel differently, and they have other things that they don't want to be steamrolled over, and that gets a real conversation going.
Can I have a follow-up question?
Okay, thank you. And now we're going to move on, and speaker is thanked. We're trying to get in a lot of voices, and so we don't want one person to have to just keep answering a lot of questions. Hands for our speaker. Good job, Alex. So now I'm looking for a speech in the negative, and next on my list is Stephen Lemstein. Welcome back. You have 4 minutes.
Okay, real quick here to get started, I'd like to define problematic. I think that's important. For this speech, I'm going to define it as something I disagree with or is wrong without crossing extreme moral boundaries. Applauding something like the attack on Paul Pelosi or the gunman who went to Justice Kavanaugh's house is unacceptable to me, and that goes beyond what I would call problematic. So those kind of cases, kind of like what was talked about in the last speech, that are actively causing harm, I won't be focusing on those. But I do think in general, when it comes to family gatherings and events, calling out general political or social statements isn't really something that I would support. There are a couple reasons for this. One, for the most part, I think relationships are a lot more important than picking which hill I'm going to die on in the midst of the mashed potatoes. Second, I think the primary goal of political discussions should be understanding other people and changing viewpoints. And I think at a family gathering, at a group event, calling someone out isn't going to be doing any of that. It defeats the purpose. Now, I do believe strongly in standing up for what I believe in, and I do love a good argument. But I think, again, a family event probably isn't the time for that argument. And I think I can stand up for what I believe in without calling anyone out. Now, I'm more progressive, and much of my family is quite to medium conservative, I guess. And I've been involved in discussions where I just had to leave the room. I couldn't be present and not spew out what I think. I've also gotten into family arguments, and I think a lot of my family probably know where I stand on these political issues. But I noticed that leaving the room, leaving the conversation, and calling someone out, going in aggressively, both don't really accomplish anything. Again, they don't move the situation forward, and they only run the risk of damaging relationships that I care very, very deeply about. I do think it's important that those who I love know what I believe, and that they know I care what they believe, and that they can talk about things they believe without me jumping on them. And I think leaving a room or going on the attack doesn't accomplish, again, really just hammer home, I think it doesn't accomplish maintaining relationships and growing relationships while also making a firm stand on what I believe in. So essentially my current approach is if somebody says something I think is problematic, I'll let it slide, or if conversation allows, I'll add something like, that's interesting. I see things differently. Or that's a viewpoint I hadn't thought about. Would you want to talk about that more later? Well, this definitely forces me to hold in on certain statements, especially when it's topics I'm very passionate about and would love to argue for 10 minutes. I think it doesn't damage the family relationships and friendships and whatnot that I am trying to balance, and opens the door for more meaningful discussion later. In my own personal experience, over the dinner arguments never do anything. They're upsetting to me, they're upsetting to those involved. It really doesn't do anything. So to close off, in response to a problematic statement from a family member, I think it's important that I make my views known, that I think something different, and then I think it's best to move on. I don't want to be a closet progressive in a sea of conservatives, but I also don't want to let my love of arguments and my passion over issues upset those around me and validate certain stereotypes that they may have. I love to be contrarian, and I love to argue, but I think family is more important than that.
All right, hands for a speaker. We'll take 1 or 2 questions for the speaker, something you're curious about, you might like him to expand on. Naomi, you can unmute and ask your question. Okay, we might have lost Naomi. Is there someone else who has a question for the speaker? All right, Dwayne, you can unmute, ask your question to the chair.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'm curious what the speaker would think regarding a situation where you have family members that just have excuses now not to show up to the family gathering anymore because what they feel like is nobody stood up to the problematic individual. They feel like you don't stand up for them, and they've stopped. They won't openly admit it, but it's pretty clear that they pulled away and stopped attending the family event because of this, and always have an excuse, and somehow are out of town, somehow busy, to where they can't be there.
For me personally, I would probably say that's partly on me. I think if I, for instance, know that something is going on, know that something is disagreed about, and someone doesn't speak up, especially if it's very important, I think as a family, as a community, it's my job maybe afterwards to go, hey, I noticed you didn't really like that. How can I support you in future? What can I do to make sure you don't have to be in that uncomfortable situation again? How can I make sure that these situations are valuable to you? So for me, it would be talking to the people involved first. And then if it means that we have to be a little more spicy at the dinner table, we can think about that. But I think first I'd want to make sure that that is actually something that they would appreciate, if that makes sense.
Okay, I'll take one more question. And Hale Powell, did I say that right? You can unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Ms. Speaker. My question is about thresholds. I think it's if you're at the dinner table and someone says something very hateful or very advocating something very extreme, whether it's on the left or the right, is there a threshold beyond which we should speak out, in your opinion?
Okay.
I think I would tend to say maybe the threshold should be above maybe what we just feel comfortable about, what our gut would tell us we need to speak out about. But I do think there is, again, like I said, applauding physical violence or things like that, I think is too much. And for things like that, I might just have to say like, hey, I think what you said is really hurtful, and it's something that I really, really care about. So if this is something you also are passionate about, I think we need to have a discussion about this later. But I can't talk about it right now. That's too upsetting.
All right. And with that, the speaker is thanked. Hands for our speaker. Normally, I'm only going to take 1 or 2 questions, and I will choose people that I haven't heard from before. So if you have a question, just step right up. Also, if you would like to make a speech, you can send a chat to your whip and tell them if you're for or against, and whether you'd like to do that. I see, looks like 3 in the affirmative, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 4 in the negative. So we're moving right along. All right, so next in the affirmative, I'm going to call on Ethan Abelman. Ethan, you can unmute and you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. With the chair's permission, I'm going to break the chair's rules a little bit and be a lot more wishy-washy about my opinion on this particular resolution. I do think, and frankly, I agree with much of what's been said on both sides so far. And that's in part because the resolution is somewhat vague and can be interpreted in different ways. Calling out presumably refers to some sort of confrontational or addressing some sort of problematic behavior in some way. I don't personally like that term because it is inherently adversarial. In some activist circles, they use the term calling in instead, which feels like a much better term. And there are different ways that you can, for lack of the better term, call out some sort of problematic behavior. Also, problematic, what does that mean? For me, the big issue comes when it is some sort of behavior or speech that is harmful, prejudiced, offensive, or otherwise denigrating towards some aspect of a person's identity. So the classic examples being racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, things like that. And my big qualifier here, and I promise I'll get to why I'm affirmative in a second, but my big qualifier is that I really genuinely think that every person and situation is different, and it's sometimes unproductive or even unsafe to engage in these types of conversations. You know, there's been questions about timing. I don't think that's something that anyone here can answer for a given situation. And this is particularly true if the problematic behavior is intertwined with your personal identity. So for example, I lost their name here, but the first speaker you know, I wouldn't necessarily think that the gay couple is obligated to call out anything, right? That's probably not, you know, if their relative says something homophobic or transphobic or whatever at Thanksgiving, I'm not going to say that they have to speak up. So I just think it's important to think about this very situationally. Now that I've gotten all my nitpicky qualifiers out of the way, in general, I think addressing problematic behavior or speech is very important and necessary, and especially so if you have a position of power. And I've sort of learned this the hard way by attending Oberlin College, which is sort of what some might think of as a call-out culture mecca, all in air quotes, right? And like most people, I've never intentionally been problematic, but I know I have my unconscious biases, and I have been personally called out, called in, whatever I want to say, for problematic speech or behavior more times than I can count or even remember. It's not fun. It's embarrassing or humiliating, but, you know, here's something interesting. When, you know, people I know have confronted me in some way or another, and it's not been adversarial, oftentimes it's not been a big deal, and my relationships with them have deepened. It's good. It can be a way of loving. It doesn't need to be adversarial. When done well, when done lovingly, it brings us closer. I don't want to do things that, or say things that make the people I'm around uncomfortable, or I don't want to offend these people. You know, so I've gotten a lot of experience, and I think it's a very difficult thing to do. It takes a lot of practice, both on the giving end and on the receiving end, but it's worth it. And it doesn't need to be a big thing. It really doesn't.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Hands for our speaker. We'll take one or two questions. You can raise your electronic hand if you would like to ask a question. If you're curious, you want to hear more, you want some clarification. All right. Hale Powell, go ahead. And then Joseph's friend. Hale, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Madam Chair, this is Hale number 2, and had a question for the speaker. What exactly is the goal of calling out? Calling out, I agree, is a confrontational term. So if someone is going to call out, are you calling out so that you can change that person's mind, to stop detestable type of speech in company, to voice your opinion, to form a better relationship with the person? Like, why would you call somebody out? I'd like to have a specific goal in mind. And once that goal is in mind, if it's to, you know, enhance a relationship, you might approach it one way. If it's just to change a person's mind another way, it's to stop detestable speech, it might be a third way. So what exactly is the goal?
All right, 1 minute to answer.
I'm very, very glad that this question was asked. I was thinking of talking a little bit about this. I'm not going to answer it directly, but I'm going to say that when you do the quote unquote, you know, air quotes everywhere, when you do the calling out, it's very important to know what your goal is. And, you know, that ties into a lot of my qualifiers that I was mentioning, I think. Like, there are some people who probably saying anything is unproductive, or saying anything about a particular topic. If the goal is to change someone's mind. And you can go through each of these scenarios that the questioner mentioned. The one thing I'll also say, though, is I think the time when you should not engage is when you are doing it essentially to show that you're quote unquote woke, or that you are just you know what's right and what's wrong, and being pompous and saying you're wrong. That is a selfish reason to do it. And I've seen a lot of people do it, and it's not productive for anyone, and it just makes them feel good. So I do think it's important. I think there's a lot of different ways to answer that question, but no matter what, if you're going to engage, know what your goal is.
All right. And Joseph, I think your Zoom window mate has a question.
Yes, this is Joseph's friend and wife, Karen. Thank you for letting us share the screen. My question is, what do you recommend when you have a family member who's been very clear? They have said politics is off the table. It is off limits. I will not discuss any politics with you. Now, I think some of it comes from the fact that this particular family member, his brother, my brother-in-law, is outnumbered if a group of us get together. And I personally have chosen to honor, it wasn't just a request, it was kind of a demand, actually, but it was just, I have chosen to honor that. And so I'm wondering if there's some other way to gently engage him in a conversation.
Okay, got about a minute.
Sure. I'll first start by humbly saying that I am not an expert in any individual family's dynamics, and so I'm not going to tell any individual person what anyone should do with any individual other person. But I'll tell you how. I'll say how I feel about it. I think, from a moral standpoint, my personal belief, I am very happy if most. Well, so here's my belief. Politics is a broad term. And if someone vehemently does not want to discuss the results of the election, or does not want to discuss supply side economics, or does not want to discuss whether or not we should expand Medicaid, I am very game with that. The line for me comes in sort of what I defined as the problematic. So if someone engages in behavior or speech that is harmful to some aspect of a person's identity, that to me is the time when, if it's the right situation and you feel able, it's important that you engage. So that's sort of how I think about it.
All right. With that, the speaker is thanked. All right, good job. We're looking for a speech in the negative, and I'm going to call on John Burke. John, you can unmute. You have up to 4 minutes.
Hi, thank you. Am I coming through?
Yes.
Good. Well, hi, everybody. Thank you, Madam Chairman. If you find yourself identifying with a lot of both sides of what you're hearing today, as I am, it's probably because it's more of a both and versus an either or, and very individual and personal with the individuals involved and the situation, the setting. And we all know that when we try to gain influence over people and viewpoints, that being respectful of the timing and the presence and the moment is really key as well. There's a backfire tendency, I think, when people attempt to teach other people when they're not positioned to want to be taught. So I'm not in favor of calling out a problematic relative. I am in favor of calling out problematic behaviors in a respectful way. So I am in the negative as the question was posed. I am in favor of understanding familial perspectives and responding honestly and respectfully, because I do believe that, as some of the other speakers said, that quite often we get distracted by the blades of grass blowing in the wind, the tactics and the positions. And yet if we delve down to the underlying purpose of the need that's being met, we find out that we're a lot more alike. And so in these discussions, I tend to suggest that we try to understand and look for the underlying purposes and needs that are being discussed, which anchor our tactics and our positions, which are usually quite volatile and intense. I think the first question that I would recommend that I have at least found useful is asking the question, what is it that I really want from me and the other person and the relationship long term? Because I know in the short term, in the moment, I want to pluck them off the planet and dangle them in space where consequently there's no oxygen. But long term, I realize that I want more. I want trust. I want the ability to have access to them and them to me. I want to grow and learn. So I try to examine my motives before, and I ask myself, what is it that I really want most? Even when I can predict that there's going to be some problematic behaviors. I have found that when I approach things with a motive of teaching other people, blaming, accusing, shaming, or fixing, I find that it doesn't go well with turkey. I find that when I have a motive up front and I'm clear of it in advance of understanding, relating, maybe sharing, maybe empathizing with the pain behind these strong positions, getting through the dragon breath to maybe consider what is the other person thinking or needing. I find that that goes better with a turkey dinner. So I think there are threshold situations. I think in threshold situations, it's not because we have problematic people as much as we have problematic behaviors. And in those moments, I think it is important to call it out in a respectful way. And there's skills. There's a book that I like to refer people to, Crucial Conversation, Tools for Talking When Stakes Are High, that I think helps with a lot of those skills. But as I get close to the end of my time, I would suggest that I think it's important to have good dialogue and approach it as problematic behaviors, be on the lookout, but not view people as problematic people. I also, in preparation, ask myself, if I'm about to label the other individual as a problematic person, why would a reasonable, rational, decent person behave this way or espouse beliefs like this? The second question I ask myself is, what role am I playing or might I start to play at the table that contributes to the tension that I'm pretending not to know about? And then finally, I ask myself, what can I do in the moment to get me back to that first question, which is, what do I really want from me and them long term? And I'll let the rest of my time go back to the room.
Okay, thank you. Hands for our speaker, and I'll take one or two questions. Anything you'd like to hear a little bit more about or a clarification? All right, Joseph?
I think my question is really pretty brief, and that, Madam Chairman, my question is, are these conversations best private between two people, or are they best with an audience? Because I think the audience in some ways raises the stakes, and the theater, that's our dog who's hungry. We do feed him well. Want some attention, but anyway. Yeah, in public or in private?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the question. I think it really depends on the individual situation. I think if you answer the first question, what is it that you really want most for you, them, and the long-term relationship, it'll help guide your answer. I think for one thing, to be most respectful, you just want to ask yourself, what is the safest, most likely way that I can get to a deeper understanding of this person's pain and issue without involving problematic behaviors that might surface. So I think it's very individual in the moment. Somebody mentioned a threshold behavior, and what do we do then? Somebody's said, I don't want to speak about stuff about politics, and then it surfaces. I would suggest that that's a problematic behavior where we say, folks, we have somebody at the table who's already decreed that they don't want to talk politics, and since we're sharing a common meal, can I suggest that we table that issue, and in the living room later on, whoever wants to conduct that talk will convene there, and I'll bring in the dessert and the beverages.
All right, dessert. I like it. I like it. Is there another question for our speaker? Otherwise, I am going to say the speaker is thanked. All right, hands for our speaker. Good job. So let's see. I am going to move to a speech in the affirmative. Leah, are you ready to make a speech? All right, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I really want to make the case why calling someone out, confronting them even in a more combative way, can be an act of love and is above all a familial act rather than the act that one would take towards a stranger. It's tolerance that we have for strangers. Tolerance where we say, well, you might be wrong, but let's just not speak about it. Let's live alongside each other as strangers, not inquiring deeply into why we disagree, just trying to keep a minimum of bother and a minimum of responsibility for each other. But it's within the family that we are our brother's keeper, that we have a particular duty, not just to the outside world to protect them from our problematic uncle, but to the uncle himself because we love him, because we believe that he wants to live rightly in the world and isn't, and that we want to correct him for his own sake. When I converted from atheism to Catholicism, it was certainly an interesting Thanksgiving. I had friends and family who I think all faced this question at Thanksgiving and in other places of whether to call me out in various ways. And I will say the most offensive thing I heard from anyone wasn't an attack on the Catholic Church. It was people who were close to me who said, well, whatever makes you happy. If this is right for you, I'm happy for you. And what I heard them saying was, I don't care if you make serious mistakes. I don't care if you believe things that are true. And I don't think being Catholic changes your life in any way. All of which are not what I'd expect from a friend who cares about me, who cares about how I act in the world, who cares about what's true and whether I know it. So when we confront someone in our family, what we're saying above all is, I think you want to know what's true. I think you're willing to wrestle with me a little bit for the sake of that good. Now, to do that, we do have to ask them to trust us, that we're doing that because we love them and not, out of a desire for mastery, out of a desire to impress our friends with how willing we are to confront our family. And that's where I think we really get into the question of, what does fraternal correction look like? Or Uncle Laurel, I forgot the Latin there, so let's stick with fraternal and sororal correction. I think it's important to look at the two parts of that to love someone like a brother or sister is to be willing to offer correction when they're wrong. But it is fraternal or sororal correction. If you aren't living as a brother or a sister to someone, if there isn't that kind of bedrock of love for you both to fall back on, then when you offer won't be fraternal or sororal correction. It will just be upbraiding. So if you only see your uncle at Thanksgiving, if you don't talk to him on his birthday, if you don't reach out at any other time, then perhaps you live as strangers already, and it's important, just to have a quiet Thanksgiving, polite as though he were a stranger on the train who you happen to see is wearing a button you disagree with. But if you want to fight with your uncle at Thanksgiving and you're not ready this Thanksgiving, spend this year investing in that relationship. Spend the year being a strong niece or nephew, a strong presence in his life, so that by the time next year you take the cover off, the warm basket of rolls, pass them out and go, so I saw what you said the other day on social media, or I heard about your lawn sign, or I'm curious about your plans for voting. That's not the only conversation you're having with your uncle. There's a web of trust to fall back on that gives you the space to offer a more combative, blunt, but loving opportunity for discussion. I yield to questions.
Thank you. Hands for our speaker. Take a question from Stacy. You can unmute and ask your question to the chair.
Yeah, I have two questions. One would be, wouldn't it be kind of more appropriate to, if you are building that relationship with said uncle, to have those kind of combative questioning questions not in front of everyone at a time where it's something that's more personal? And then my second question is, if you see it as more of an act of love to question someone's choices, wouldn't that be contradicting an important aspect of humility, that we don't know all the answers and it's possible that someone else could be seeing something that we don't see, especially in terms of faith where you can't really prove anything one or the other?
I'll hit the first part very briefly so I can spend more time on the second, since we had two questions woven together. It's good to talk to people one-on-one, and sometimes it's helpful to talk to people in a group, especially if there are other people on their side and everyone has a little room to pause, think, trust someone else to take up the baton rather than feel like they have to carry the whole argument themselves or they'll lose face if they get quiet for a moment. I've had very good 2-on-2 conversations. In some ways, this is what we're doing at a very large scale tonight. But as to the question of intellectual humility, I think one of the good ways of expressing intellectual humility is straightforwardly saying, I think you're wrong, here's why. I'm up to hear what you say in return. But when we express humility by just avoiding the question or saying, I can't be sure of what I believe, I don't think we're telling the truth. It may be that we're wrong, but we don't act like we're wrong. We make choices that matter based on our beliefs. And if we want to examine them, we should put them out straightforwardly, not say, well, I might be wrong about this. I am organizing my whole life around it, but I might be wrong. Test the beliefs, don't kind of underplay the beliefs.
Okay, I'll receive another question from John Bork.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to ask the speaker, it's kind of related to what Stacy asked earlier. Other than potentially maybe using a biblical reference from a Catholic perspective, the question would be, who defines, you use the words, when they see somebody making a mistake and for their own good, who defines whether it's a mistake and who defines whether it's for their own good, you or them or others?
I don't think any person defines this. What's right and wrong is right and wrong. Morality is like mathematics. It's something we uncover and explore, but it's not something we create. So when someone makes a mistake in a mathematical proof, they're making a mistake relative to the absolute truth of mathematics. When we make a mistake in our relationships to each other, we make it against an absolute standard of right and wrong that goes beyond our own preferences or conventions. That's my answer to that part of it. And what does it mean for it to be a mistake? Well, since we're into the theological portion of the evening at dinner, which I guess would be more of like the coffee and liquor part, but so we're a little early. A mistake is falling short of what the fullness of truth and goodness demands of us, right? A mistake can be fully swerving away or just failing to live up to it fully. It might be actively hurting someone, or it might be failing to love them as fully as we ought to. But to give the theological answer, evil is a privation of the good, a lack of something good, not a force in itself. So when we make a mistake, we're falling short of the goodness we're capable of.
All right, and with that, our speaker is thanked. Hands for our speaker. And you might be interested to know that Leah Sargent is a writer and speaker and thinker, and is also the chief of staff for our national online debates with Braver Angels. And we appreciate you very much. All right, our next speech will be against the resolution, Susan Lindsay. Susan, would you like to make a speech? You have up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am not for the resolution. And the reason that I say this is because for the last 3 years, I have been having what could be considered a family conversation every 2 to 4 weeks with a group of cousins who are completely different from each other. We have a very liberal Quaker. We have a evangelical Christian. We have an evangelical conservative Catholic. And then we have a couple of other evangelical right-wing Christians, conservative into conspiracy theories. So we have been meeting at my instigation for 3 years because I initially called them and said, I really want to know why you are for the present president. So we talked about everything. We would take an issue, we would read up on it, we would research it, we would send articles, podcasts, videos around, get back together and talk. And we had 2 kind of rules. One is that we would share these, but the second rule in our discussions was that we would find something in the other person's viewpoint that we could say yes to, and we would tell them that. The 3 things, so we did that for 2 or 3 years. The 3 things that stand out as a result, one is that the only time that the opposing view has been open to a different narrative is by hearing a personal story. And when a personal story was told and the lessons were implicit, not explicit, people could hear the other point of view. 2, research data, opinions about the issue was the last thing that made any difference in changing people's mind. And 3, and this we finally all have come to the conclusion of and sort of stopped what we've been doing for 3 years, is that if a person feels loved and honored and trusted, even if they have an opposing view, there does seem to be a slight chance that the other one will be able to hear, but that the most important thing that has come out of these 3 years is that we do know that we honor each other, we trust the other's intentions, basically, and that we need to love each other, and that is really where we have come down on. And so we've actually stopped talking about those things. So I guess the last thing I'd say is when asked, what do I want to come out of this, is can I let go of winning for the possibility of connecting and feeling the gratitude towards a person that doesn't think like me.
All right, I'll take questions now. And I see Ed Ames has his hand raised. Ed, would you like to unmute and ask your question to the chair?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to, I had a question for the prior speaker, but it bounced. I don't know if that's out of order.
Oh, okay. I'm looking for a question for Susan Lindsay. So does someone have a question? If so, you can raise your electronic hand.
Okay. The only thing I want to say to the current speaker is respect for what you did. That's really a noble and great thing you did for your family.
Thank you.
Thank you. April Joyce Teal, you can ask your question to the chair.
Hi, Madam Chair. What I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's a real concerted effort to make the choice to be happy versus right. Would that be correct?
Oh, no. The thing that I have learned is that it actually does not make that much difference to argue data, facts, opinions, articles, because people have come in with pretty strong views anyway. So the only thing that really has changed anybody is hearing a story. So if my goal is to see if they can open up or I can open up, then let's do things that will actually accomplish that. Does that answer your question, Joy?
No, it's more
April.
It's more the sentiment of having grace and humility.
Well, definitely that is part of it, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. But I guess I was hung up on the word happy. That is not necessarily what I'm after. I really am after the relationship, because I think if the relationship is sound and and respectful, that there are ways of affecting the other person in a positive way, in a way that will change them, but it is through your personal experience and letting the lesson be implicit.
Thank you. I totally agree. People want to tell their story, and I think people are very hungry to have people listen to their story. So thank you very much.
All right, we'll take another question from Christine Gilman. Christine, you can unmute and ask your question to the chair.
Thank you so much. Susan, I so appreciated what you said. I have a question, and it's on a personal level. we have a daughter who's grown, and we've seen her increasingly at our family Zooms and family gatherings become more and more quiet until she just did not show up anymore and sent a letter that she no longer can have contact without giving a reason. So I'm just wondering, how do you approach someone who is completely shut off in such a way when we don't have any evidence of even having a purpose? Although we could tell that more and more she was becoming closed towards some of the political things, which we don't really care about the political. We're involved in the relational and loved her to pieces. And what do you do when there's just the silence and you can't make that move?
Susan, you have about a minute to respond.
Well, it may have nothing to do, I'm not a psychologist, it may have nothing to do with the family gathering. But there's two questions that have really helped me with anybody that I have learned to ask them, which is, what do you need? I wouldn't do it in public, but I do it in private. What do you need and how can I help? And that's really is about as much as we can do.
Thank you.
All right, with that, the speaker is thanked. Hands for our speaker. All right. We're about to do a little poll. Before we do that, in the registration, after registration had already started, maybe for the last half of the people, that we added a question in registration. What is it you would like to learn? And we got lots. I've got a page and a half single spaced of questions people had that they would like to learn. And a lot of them can actually be answered in our workshops. So I want to ask Jim to put a poll up here. And the poll is simply, have you attended any of the Braver Angels workshops? Skills for talking across the divide, families and politics, red blue workshop, depolarizing within, any of those. So we're going to do the poll right now. Okay, just a minute, a little bit more. Anybody else? Okay, why don't we wrap up the poll and show the results. Okay, can you see the results? I can see them. Have you attended any of the Braver Angels workshops? 35 people said yes. So, all right, that gives us a good idea. And I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing that and close that. All right. I sat in last night on the Families and Politics workshop that was sponsored by Braver Angels Oregon, here where I live. And it was really fun, just very much fun. I think it's even more fun than the original skills workshop. So I do commend it to you if you are interested. And one of the things in it, Bill Doherty, who's our designer of the Braver Angels workshops, he's a marriage and family therapist in Minnesota, and he's as nice as any Minnesotan you ever met. And he was asked, should you ever cut off a family member because of political differences? Should you ever cut them off? And he said, over politics, he said, no. And of course, abuse, toxicity, that's a different thing. But over what the politicians do and what the media says, he says, no. So that's why we try to learn these good techniques. And a lot of your questions that you put in here would be answered through a workshop. That being said, we have a lot of stories in the room, people who have actually experienced things. And I would encourage you to share your stories as we continue What have you experienced, and how did you get through it? And what tips do you have for us? This is kind of a thrill of victory, agony of defeat, whatever you want to share with us. So I'm going back to my list of speakers, and let's see. 2 monitors is tricky, but I can do this. All right. So we are now looking for a speech in the affirmative, and that looks like David Froba. David, would you like to speak? And I'm going to bring the speeches down to 3 minutes. So I'm trying to get some more folks in. So 3 minutes. David, would you like to speak?
Yes, regardless of how you may look at it one way or the other, I think that if there are children present, that it's a whole different dynamic. I think if children are present, they deserve to hear people who they love or at least respect have civil discussions with one another. Also, if there's something actually toxic said, I don't think that that can be allowed to stand without being answered as gently and as in the Braver Angel sense as possible.
All right, thank you. Any questions? Would you like to hear a little bit more from David, or would you like to, you have something that you're curious about you'd like to ask? Yeah, Stacy, can unmute, ask your question to the chair.
Yeah, I was just, thank you so much for bringing up the fact that children in the room makes a difference. My question is, what happens if you disagree on what's considered toxic?
Okay, go ahead, David.
Well, I think if one individual considers something as toxic or maybe seen to be toxic, then it should be addressed.
All right, we'll take one more question. Stephen can unmute and ask your question to the chair.
Madam Chair, I would ask, if children are present, how do you keep discussions from getting angry and difficult and really aggressive? Because I think that's something that I know if I was a child watching people that I love, adults that I love, really being hateful towards each other would be hurtful to me. So how do you keep that from happening?
Go to the Braver Angels workshops.
All right, I love it. And with that, the speaker is thanked. Well, that was kind of awesome. All right, for speech in the negative, that's just a great example of you don't have to use all your time to really make a terrific point. So let's see, Michael Cooper. Michael, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for this wonderfully crafted resolution that I'm going to speak against. So real quick, so I grew up in one of the most conservative parts of the country, a small town in the foothills of North Carolina. In the Bible Belt, I grew up 2 miles from a NASCAR speedway, so it was a very conservative place. I ended up going off to college and getting a degree and going to Washington, D.C. and interning for a congressman who chaired the House Progressive Caucus in Washington, D.C. So where I ended up going was very different from where I came from. But I made a decision along the way to come back. And so after law school, I came back home in 2014 and began work and made a life here. And one of the reasons why I did that, when I was in my early 20s, I dealt with addiction, like a lot of people from this area. And the people who were there for me when that happened weren't people who agreed with me on politics, about healthcare or climate change or gun control. They were people who had a bond, a family connection, some reason to be supportive when they didn't have to. And that taught me a lot about life and what matters in life and the things that we need to cherish and value. And so that's given me a perspective on it. It's been, it is a challenge to try to maintain relationships across the political divide. It's not uncommon for friends from across the country and my family or friends from back home to argue with each other on Facebook in the comments section. And I've had to deal with that. And I've had to sort of pull myself back and talk about politics less on social media and on those spaces because I know where it can lead to. But I do think it's important, having seen that in my own life, I think it's important. You see right now, there's a big crisis of loneliness in this country. People report feeling lonelier than they have, and certainly in our lifetime. And I think that people feel pretty divided and pretty isolated. We see our family members less. We see our friends less. We have people over for dinner less often than we used to. That's not healthy. And so I think the opportunities that we get to see our friends and family, to have these conversations, I think we need to make the most of it and, try to put politics aside and try to just have a good, healthy conversation about what we're up to, about the things that we're excited about what our kids are doing, about what our sports team's doing. And maybe, after having a more, deeper and human conversation, maybe towards the end of that, if we want to get into what's going on in the world, maybe that's a better starting place. A couple of years ago, I did when I was a reporter, I did a story about a guy who ran this ministry for homeless people in the woods in North Carolina. And he would go and he would provide resources for them, tents and heaters and things like that. And he seemed like the most amazing guy I'd ever met, the most saintly figure I'd ever met. And at the end of spending a couple of days with him reporting on it, I made the mistake of bringing up politics. And I realized that his views on politics were the exact opposite of mine. And that if he wasn't doing a homeless ministry, he would be, protesting outside of an abortion clinic. And that's where he said it was one of his other causes. But he was the most amazing figure I'd ever met in real life. But I think if we begin these conversations with the things that we're actually care about in our own life, I think that's important. So don't give up on each other. I think it's important to try to maintain these bonds.
Okay. Any questions for the speaker? You can raise your electronic hand and ask a question if you're curious about something. Bruce, you can unmute, ask your question to the chair.
The question I have, and I think the comment you made that was very specific, I was a guinea pig on how to talk politics with your dad on Slate Communications with Monica Guzman. And I was the guinea pig dad, Bruce. So the topic is very relevant to my own family, and we exposed ourselves on a podcast to the world who would ever listen. I learned a lot because I'm more conservative. My kids are a little more liberal. I tend to throw political cartoons and that kind of thing around. And I couldn't believe that in spite of being around them for 50 years, we ran into these divisive political aspects.
Can you move towards your question?
So the question is that the speaker mentioned about sharing, because my kids brought this up, how to share your personal relationships, the bonds that hold you together, to make sure you have that solid foundation underneath you to talk about differences.
Okay,
that's a great question. I think we all, I don't think any of us are perfect in this regard, but I think we can all try to make more of an effort, to see our family, to see, old friends that we have. When we think about all these holiday movies, all these Christmas movies that come out, my favorite movie, It's a Wonderful Life. My other favorite movie, Home Alone or Die Hard. They're all about bonds of family. They're all about the person at the end of it realizing that whether it's their spouse or, Uncle Scrooge or whoever it is, how important it is to maintain those bonds and to spend time with them. It's not about, our disagreements that we have politically. So I think, embracing that theme of all of these holiday movies like Die Hard, and just, finding ways to get over it and to spend time and have good conversations. And if it comes to politics, talk about it, but I think do so with a level of understanding and compassion. I think it's pretty important.
All right, very good. Not seeing any other questions. I'm going to just keep it moving forward. So with that, the speaker is thanked. All right, good job. So just to let you know kind of where we're going, Jacob Sandler, then Paul Norris, then Ron Adams, Joni Williams, Leslie Lepeto, and Stacy Carruth. And that'll probably just take us right to the end. So we're super good for speakers. Let's hear from Jacob. Is that right? Yeah. Jacob, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wanted to shout out to Bruce. I'm joined Braver Angels because of that podcast that I heard that How To did. So thank you, Bruce. The How to Talk Politics with Your Dad was why I joined Braver Angels, and it inspired me. To actually reach out to my own family and try to reconcile. I had cut them off 3 years ago, and we're just now trying to make amends with that. So thank you for that part. So I am speaking in the affirmative. I decided that I didn't have to accept the micro and macro aggressions from my family anymore. I was raised in a family where the rules were, we don't talk politics because it's divisive, and home is a sanctuary. That the world is difficult, the world is hard, the world is sometimes cruel and bullies are real, but that I should feel safe and loved at home. And if I described my childhood in bumper stickers, it would definitely be like lessons of colorblindness and coexist. But the net result of those premises resulted in me not being raised in a home that I learned how to have deep conversations that were important, how to have political discourse that didn't end in fighting or yelling. We just accepted everyone with tolerance, but never learned how to understand the other person's perspective. More broadly, I think a lot of our society grew up with those rules. And I think if you look around at the polarization, it's kind of why we're at the place where we're at. If everyone grew up with rules that you don't talk about politics because it's difficult, then no one learns how to have deep and meaningful conversations while understanding the other person's perspective. And I think that's kind of where we ended up. That leads me to kind of about that, problematic uncle. When we hear microaggressions or the macroaggressions at home, where it's supposed to be our sanctuary, where we're supposed to feel loved and safe, how do we keep the peace? How do we return to that nice and pleasant dinner? Silence? I wouldn't really agree, because silent is tacit consent. When we are silent, the last voice spoken is accepted and understood. When that one is the majority opinion, the minority never receives representation. And without visibility, the person who's young, especially when we're talking about children, grow up in a family that they don't think they're going to be loved and supported. So I don't see how you can reconcile having home as a sanctuary, but also having the bullies in your home where it's accepted.
Mm-hmm.
So from my perspective, to not address the comment allows just one narrative to dominate, the majority narrative, and that holds space with no alternative. I would like to end my time with stating that I was subjected to repeated microaggressions as a child and while going through puberty and into adulthood. No one with power stepped up to defend me or to speak to acceptance of me. In their silence, I found no support. In that silence, the majority of traditional values stood. If anyone were to have stepped up or spoken out to show me that acceptance and support, I would have felt that home is sanctuary, and I would have felt loved and supported, and I wouldn't have felt I had to seek others to find home and acceptance. So with that, I yield.
Okay. Thank you. Hands for a speaker. Bill Easley, would you like to ask a question? You can unmute and ask your question to the chair. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go
Okay.
ahead and ask your question to me.
Well, Madam Chairman, been listening to this all evening, and this is pretty technical and pretty philosophical and pretty deep on a subject that should not be quite this complex. The purpose of a family gathering, I believe the example you've set up is a family gathering at Thanksgiving and scraps break out. And that's a shame. It is not, we should realize it is not a debate stage. It's not a debate club. We're not going over there in there trying to win an argument. We're just trying to go in and have a little fellowship with our family. And if politics comes up or religion comes up, do it in a respectful manner. I mean, it's just that simple. And shouting matches never win anything. A good ploy in an argument is to change the subject or ask the speaker questions about himself. Everybody wants to talk about themselves. You know, that's the most wonderful thing. Let them talk about themselves. Change the subject. Change it from politics to something that you know the group can agree upon.
I'm just going to redirect and say, do you have a question for the speaker?
Yeah, my question is, I'm sorry, I have a comment. I'm sorry you grew up like that, and that that your family was hard on you and stuff like that. I don't know how in the world you could have fought it. One thing is to just not participate in those things, and families that are that abusive don't deserve my presence as far as I'm concerned. And no one's going to win an argument when they're so deeply divided. That, Madam Chairman, I'm not sure that's what you wanted, but anyway, that's the way I feel.
Okay, Jacob, would you like to respond?
No, I agree. For me, that's kind of why I joined Braver Angels. Is for me, there's this argument that I'm trying to figure out the duality of we can't accept intolerance, but being intolerant of intolerant people in itself is intolerance. So for me to leave because I'm treated poorly, or for me to leave because it's toxic, you know, no one gains from that and we all lose. And I think the solution to that isn't silence and retreat. I think it's fostering ways to have healthy conversations where you can still disagree, but you can understand and love each other. Where instead of accepting problematic statements with silence, you can say, you know, I'd love to hear why you believe that way or why you feel that, and kind of approach it with that curiosity to understand them. And then that opens the door for them to better understand you. And I think from there, you can find true acceptance, not just tolerance or coexistence or leaving the conversations unsaid. And particularly with children, I think it's important that they should learn how to have these conversations and learn how to find that acceptance and have discourse that's productive and not destructive. And I don't think a lot of us were taught that growing up. And I think it's largely why our country is so divided now, is we never learn to listen, to understand. We learn to argue and fight to make our points.
All right. And with that, the speaker is thanked. Our next speaker is Paul Norris. And I'm going to give 3 minutes, but nobody has to take all that time. You can say what you want to say. So, Paul, are you ready to speak?
Yeah, so this is a personal experience story, I think. I grew up with blatant racism in my family, things that I just haven't heard said in ages. And I remember very clearly, even like maybe 5 years old, being ashamed of my own mother. I think this had something to do with this maybe being on the cusp from poverty to lower middle class. But as a child, you know, I couldn't speak up, but I did say a lot with looks and silence. I knew what I was hearing was wrong, even though maybe I was like 5 years old. I've since come to understand, though, that in my mother's case, that came from really serious trauma. And I have, you know, over time, I have come to suspect what that trauma was and to understand it. But I would say, you know, my parents, and especially my mother, moved over time. I made a statement that I thought was pretty strong when I married outside my race. that probably kind of hit home. But you know, my parents really shifted, and you know, they accepted my wife. They accepted and loved their mixed race granddaughter. Since then, I've been had the experience of being accepted, or that my daughter and children were accepted by my mother's family, and I'm just struck by how far things have moved in that time. That said, I went to a very progressive graduate school about 10 years ago, and as an old white man, I wish somebody had told me, you got a target on your back before I ever walked through the door. And I've seen and experienced call outs done well, very rarely, and I've seen them done really badly. And a good call out is private, calm, and explanatory. as opposed to other people I've seen who are just looking for a fight. They're looking for an opportunity to attack somebody. And an old white man is a great ideal target, no matter where he comes from or what his heart is like, what his heart holds. So what I say from this is, if you're going to call somebody out, look within. Where are you coming from? Are you coming from a place of love, or are you coming from a place of your own anger and unprocessed hatred, looking for a target? And I just point out, when you're defined by what you're against, you come to resemble the thing that you're against. That's it.
All right, hands for our speaker. Is there a question for our speaker? Okay, I'm going to move us forward then. With that, the speaker is, well, April Joy, would you like to ask a question?
I'm just wondering how you have gotten such an enlightened point of view. I very much appreciate your point of view, Madam Chair.
Wow. Well, I always have a little bit of trouble with that E word, but Braver Angels had a lot to do with it. And just ultimate, really, really looking within. Look within, see where you're coming from, and be honest about it. That's the very first thing. Be honest about where you're coming from.
That's beautiful. With that, the speaker is thanked. And Paul, I'm going to ask for a little bit more from you a little bit later about Braver Angels. Next up, Ron Adams, would you like to speak in the affirmative? Ron, you have up to 3 minutes.
Thank you. This is my first Braver Angels event.
Woohoo, welcome.
Glad to be here. I'm really impressed. I find myself writing down names like Paul Norris and Susan Lindsay and John Burke and Leah Sargent. So I'm impressed with everybody I've heard on both sides of the perspective. When I teach this subject about civil conversation in an uncivil culture, I like to start with a statement that says, have a discussion before the discussion about the discussion. And I think that's really important, Madam Chair. I forgot to say Madam Chair, sorry. So I'd like to speak in the affirmative that it's, I find myself in a family of liberals. And then I found myself recently where I needed to call out the liberals. And what I've kind of heard all evening in this is, normally when we're talking about calling out, we're talking about calling out an uncle that happens to be on the conservative side. And we often use the word toxic when we're referring to conservatives. And there's another word that can be used often when referring to more progressives, and that is hubris. And that's what I'm finding, is that in our family, where you have a physician who was trained at Oberlin, as was mentioned before, you have an inner city Detroit social worker, you have a scientist, there's a lot of hubris. And so the situation in which I had to call out one of our progressive family members was because there was shaming going on in front of the group at a family dinner because of a misspoken word, a microaggression, but a microaggression made out of ignorance. There was interrogation over the use of the wrong word or the wrong concept. And there was this, what happens is that it drives the group to walk on eggshells or talk on eggshells. It drives some to silence because of this calling out. So I felt like I was in a position of calling out the person who was calling out. And all of this was in the context of a family that is supposed to have a trusting, loving relationship. And in the context of a family who basically believes on the same side of the perspective. What a lot of liberals don't realize is that there's a pathology and a virtue in every position. And what I hear people saying here, the people I mentioned and others, is that it's important for us to get to the virtuous side when we're talking with somebody else and we disagree with them, to look at their virtues and not look at their pathologies. If we do that, we can have a real discussion. And so that's my main point, is that more progressive people oftentimes find it very, very easy to pick out the pathologies of the more conservative side of our country, but they find it very difficult to pick out the pathologies within progressivism. And I'll leave it at that.
All right, thank you. Hands for our speaker. Is there a question for Ron? Gretchen, you can unmute and ask your question to the chair.
So you noted that the other side sometimes
The speaker noted,
sorry,
yeah.
the speaker noted that the other side sometimes fails to see their pathologies. I was wondering how the speaker felt about the similar question for his own side.
Oh, okay, if I may answer that, I feel like we're all on the same side. So I share the same pathology, and that is a tendency toward hubris, a tendency like I think Paul Norris mentioned he had difficulty with the E word, the enlightenment word. And those on the progressive side, I think, have a tendency to believe we're more enlightened than those on the more conservative side in our country. And that is partially why the conservative side, it's not so much about a person that has come to the forefront, but it's what has driven many of more conservatives mad about the progressive side is there's too much hubris.
All right.
Can I ask a quick follow-on question?
I'm going to move us forward, actually, but thank you. All right, with that, the speaker is thanked. We have a few more people that we want to give an opportunity to speak. To Joni Williams. Joni, would you like to speak? You have up to 3 minutes.
I would. So I am coming at this from a slightly different perspective, Madam Chairman. I am against calling out. I am also biracial. I am Black and white. I am also disabled. I am also strongly linked to the Pride community through a variety of ways I won't go into right now. But I am the problematic uncle. My voice has been silenced by tacit assumption that everyone at the table is the same. I am often the single person of color, the seemingly single agnostic, the single one with pride, and the singular one who is disabled. I'm silenced by assumption that everyone is conservative. I live in Texas. I grew up in North Carolina. That no one is different. For me, the entire table is the problematic one. I've never spoken up out of misguided Southern niceness, what I call toxic grace. But I've never been seen. I've never been comfortable, and I've never been allowed to even defend myself with blatantly sexist, homophobic, racist things are said. As a spiritual pagan, I must always gracefully allow space for Christian prayer to be spoken, and I bow my head in respect. But I am never allowed to speak to the beauty of Goddess and the spirit of trees. As often the solitary person of color, I am expected to let coded language slide despite an intimate awareness of the racial subtext, even when the person uttering that thinks they're not being harmful, assuming that everyone knows that the root of Black people's problems is the destruction of the nuclear family. It completely disavows slavery, followed by Reconstruction, followed by Jim Crow laws, civil rights atrocities, redlining, and the continual interpretation of laws that mean Black folks still have not had a fair shake. They may truly believe they are not being racist. The fact that they have zero knowledge or desire to learn about the unfair playing field that is in and of itself, at the very least, ignorant and uneducated, if not overtly racist. I have a lot of other topics on this, but in the interest of time, I won't speak to pronouns. I won't speak to wokeness. I won't speak to jokes about the left not being able to define woman. What I will say is that when someone uses harmful language and I want to defend myself as my identity is torn to shreds over turkey, mac and cheese, and green bean casserole, I am the problematic uncle. but no one knows because I've never been seen, I've never been understood, and I am asking to stop being silenced by the assumptions of sameness. I am asking for permission and support to be the problematic uncle and to respond finally to the constant calling out I experience in those subtexts just for existing differently. I'm automatically wrong. I'm asking that instead of calling you out, I'm given permission to call on you to be better. So no, I don't want to call you out. I don't want to stop. So I do want you to stop subversively calling me out. I want permission and support to call everyone to be better. When you silence me, I realize I was not part of the gathering. When you silence me, the cranberry sauce choked me. I am calling on you to bring me back to the table.
All right, thank you. Hands for our speaker. Susan, would you like to ask a question of the speaker? You can direct that to the chair.
Yes, Madam Chair. I would like to ask the speaker what questions she would like to have that would honor her desire to be a part of the conversation.
I love that question. And I think for me, it's a matter of thinking about the things that you take inherently as a privilege or desire to happen. For instance, my Methodist minister grandfather, always did say a prayer. Then we also sang a song called Johnny Appleseed. Then he also asked if there was other traditions that needed to be honored. And all it was doing was saying, here's what I want to do. And here's a song that is a Quaker in nature that recognizes a part of my family that was Quaker. And here's an opportunity for anyone who has been brought, friends or family, to the table to offer another prayer, another grace.
Okay. All right. Is there another question for our speaker? All right. Thank you. Hands for our speaker. Speaker is thanked. All right. Our next speaker is in the affirmative, Leslie Lupedo. Leslie, you have up to 3 minutes.
Okay, well, actually, I have been so moved by what other people have said, and people have in many ways covered a lot of what I was going to say, so I can be quite short. And I want to thank people like Joni and Michael, who shared very personal stories and shared some courage. I think, first I would acknowledge that there are some times where you just can't have these conversations, no matter how well-intentioned you are. I think that one hopes for a degree of genuineness and love among family members. And the main point that I would make is that that there are consequences to ignoring things or not saying things. And I think Joni just expressed one of those consequences, and that it's not just acts of commission that cause problems, but acts of omission that also cause problems, and that cause people in a family to feel alienated, to feel withdrawn, to isolate themselves. I've seen that happen. And I think that if those conversations can be held, and I agree with Paul that they need to be, in most cases, they function much better as one-on-one conversations than one on a table conversations. I can't imagine Joni trying to talk to her family table, but perhaps a one-on-one is possible. So, I guess my main point is that the things that you don't talk about do have effects. It's not that you can successfully avoid having effects by not talking about them. And that's all I got to say.
All right. Is there a question for the speaker? All right. With that, the speaker is thanked. For speech in the negative, Stacy Caruth. Did I get that right? Stacy, you have up to 3 minutes.
You are one of the few. Good job. I'm going to keep the camera off and putting kids to bed. But I just wanted to make an argument for in the negative. I come from a very conservative family. That's how we were all raised. Many of us have gone over to the liberal side, myself included. And so for those who just are so intent on changing people's minds, I know the process that it takes to completely change your worldview and to actually want to listen to someone. And that does not happen at a family gathering. That happens the 360 other days of the year. And so I would just plead that, especially thinking about who prepared the meal, whose house are you at? Especially in my family, it's mostly the matriarch and the patriarch of the family, and those people are the ones that actually want to be really political, and I don't, because I feel like everyone's trying to change my mind. And so definitely being respectful, but having those private conversations to express how you feel loved, how you make connection with people, rather than out in front of everyone, especially the people who've spent so much time to make that gathering possible. And then also I've seen some people express like, well, I love being called out, or I don't love being called out. We have communication, we've got Zoom, we've got chat. You can call people and ask them, do you feel loved if I make these comments, or do you feel attacked? And getting to know how someone would feel loved is probably the most important thing when you decide what to do in that public setting. But as far as like the reasons you need to have some discussions and for abuse and toxicity, like have that in a private conversation, because then you can actually go deeper instead of deal with all of the biases of just being embarrassed. And I'm done.
Okay. All right. Is there any question for the speaker? All right. And the speaker is thanked. So we are just 10 minutes away from closing, and the next thing we want to do is have the wrap up a review of what we learned and what we enjoyed. I can't get to every speaker, and I am sorry for that, but we want to move to this. So I'm going to declare the formal round of the debate closed. Good work, everybody. And the next thing is, what did you learn? Or what did you enjoy? We're going to open the chat, so you can chat if you want to, put it in there, but also you can raise your electronic hand to say something you learned or something you enjoyed. And this is not the time to say, I learned that the other side is stupid and ill-informed. This is a time to say something you learned or something you enjoyed. Jacob and then Ed.
So one of my favorite shares that was here was part that I wanted to include in mine, is the gentleman who spoke about being the conservative in a liberal family. And I love the flip of that. And it reminds me of a video where it's like, what if everyone in the world was like gay and these straight kids had to come out to their families? And so like what I kind of learned from that is like, think of if you had flipped the script and if you were in their shoes, how would you want that to be handled? And we all know the golden rule, do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. But there's also the platinum, which is do unto others the way they want to be treated. And so if you can flip the script and truly understand them and know how they'll react, you'll be in a far stronger place than just trying to like espouse your perspectives and your views.
Thank you. Ed, what did you learn or what did you enjoy?
I reinforced a lot that I enjoyed the personal comments. The comment by someone who said she'd gone from a very conservative to a more liberal view, and she understood that what was involved in that kind of a transformation. The woman who had set up the thing with her cousins where they were meeting, and she bears out what the research says: you don't convince people by facts and by reason, that you can't win a emotional argument with a rational rational point.
Thank you.
Yeah. So
Thanks,
yeah,
Paul.
it was good.
Paul, what did you learn or enjoy?
Well, a combination. I really enjoyed Joni's share, and interesting phrase I don't think I've heard before, toxic grace. Something to think about.
Yes. April, what did you learn or enjoy?
I really enjoyed the overall passion, the pain, but mostly the hope that I hear in every single speaker.
Thank you. Luke, what did you learn or enjoy?
I enjoyed being reminded of the fundamental validity of the negative side in this debate. It's something I don't think about a lot, but I heard a really compelling set of arguments on it, even though I don't agree with them. But it was a nice reminder, and so I appreciate that from all of you.
Bill, what did you learn or enjoy? You can unmute. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
I learned that I am blessed to have apparently a pretty dull family, because we have our arguments and everything, but there's nothing deep-seated, there's nothing that would be harmful to my psyche or anybody's as far as I'm concerned. So you guys that have had this troublesome holidays and family situations and what have you, I'm thankful to the good Lord that I haven't gone through this. And it's been helpful to me to hear that there are other problems. And Braver Angels, I think, is trying to figure out a way to help us deal with that. Those of us that have difficult situations. And so anyway, I learned a lot, and thanks to all of you.
Thank you. Joni, what did you learn or enjoy?
Sorry, I was also responding to messages that were direct to me because the chat opened up. What I really loved about this is I had been sort of beaten to a pulp that divisiveness was the order of the day, and I loved finding the connection. I listened to people who grew up in the same place that I grew up. Michael Cooper talked about growing up in the foothills of North Carolina, as did I. And I loved hearing the ways we connect. There were so many different voices that had different perspectives on things. It gave me ways to speak new power and new voice into my own experience in a way that could be heard. So thank you for that.
Kenny, what did you learn or enjoy?
Sorry, I was also responding to messages. What I also learned is kind of what Joni said, that there are sometimes people who grow up in the same places that may or may not have the same perspective of you. And I really enjoyed just like hearing everyone's point of view on this topic.
Thank you. Bruce, what did you learn or enjoy? You can unmute there.
That we seem to be concentrating a little bit on the extremes and the extraordinary. And I think we have a lot more commonality within ourselves. If we can refocus on what's bringing us together in common as a country, as a people, we're going to make progress. If we keep arguing about the extremes, we're going to be divided. So I'm hoping that, as the angels have commented, we have a lot more in common to share.
Roy, what did you learn or enjoy?
I learned not to follow Bruce because he's going to steal your thunder. No, that's exactly what I was going to say, that it's really the tip of the iceberg, and that we all have way, way more in common. And that, frankly, having to talk about politics over a family meal is a first world problem. We got way more going on that we have in common in sharing food and space and love and history together than the little tip of that iceberg that we like to disagree about.
Hale, what did you learn or enjoy? You can unmute, Hale. You have to unmute because we can't hear you.
Okay.
There you go.
What I've learned after hearing some of those remarkable stories, very, very eloquent, remarkable stories, is that you can't overreach. If the goal is what we do at a family gathering, that if you come from strength and love and talk to the others at the table, you can speak, and they'll get that. They'll get that you're not demeaning, attacking them, that you're coming from the position of strength and love, and you care about them. And you can disagree. We've been disagreeing for 240 years, and we're going to continue to disagree. Disagreement is fine. It's where you're coming from, and not to look at others, because you're never going to be able to control your others. You have to control yourself and where you're coming from.
Colleen, what did you learn or enjoy?
I really enjoyed everything about this. I really miss civil conversations and hearing different perspectives and real life experiences. And what I learned is that I believe I would like a moderator, a timer, and raising hands at my next
That's great. Lindsay, what did you enjoy or learn? Oh, you got to unmute, Lindsay.
I learned from everybody who shared tonight, but I'm new to Braver Angels, so this whole format was so eye-opening for me. What a lovely way for everyone to have a voice and everyone else to listen. It was just beautiful. Thank you. I've taken a lot away from this.
You're very welcome. Paul, can you give us just a minute about what we do here?
Yeah, so Cynthia made it really clear that I'm supposed to be quick. There are many programs in Braver Angels. I really recommend you go to the website, braverangels.org, to see the breadth of what we have, from highly structured to little structure. So why join BA? Well, it's good for your sanity. It can help you to get away from the fear and maybe even some of the hatred floating around in the environment. You might even make friends with somebody on the other side. I'm looking at you right now, Leslie. I don't know, we're getting close to being friends, I guess, although we seem to give opposite speeches every single debate that comes up. And it just might turn out that we might end up saving our country. So that's it. I think that's less than a minute.
That's pretty good, Paul. Yeah. So you are going to receive an email on Saturday from having registered that will give you some links to, why don't we put in the, let's see, there's a link to what we do. Good. Thank you, Jim. We encourage you to support Braver Angels. Good. Support us. There is a feedback form. Do we want to put that in the chat right now, Jim? Where you can just click on that and do feedback. We really appreciate the feedback because we're always learning, always improving, doing our best to just do the best that we can. There it is, feedback link right there. And if you click on it now, it'll open that window and hopefully you can find your Zoom again. I just want you to know that this is one of my most favorite things that I get to do. I feel like being part of this is a way that I can help my country besides voting. And it's been super meaningful to me now. Probably it's been 5 years now I've been involved, and I just cherish these times. So thank you so much for being a part of it, and we hope to see you again. There will be another national debate in January. It's going to be something about corporations. That'll be super interesting. All right, so we are going to send you out. Jim, staff, is there anything else we need to say before we go? All right, then good night, everybody.